Hi class, it's me, Dr. Jarman. I just thought I would go over a couple more homework problems from the end of the chapter exercises from chapter 1 because I know that your homework is due on Monday and I didn't quite finish all of those problems in the lecture today. So I'm going to go ahead and give you just a little bit of extra teaching today to help you out over the weekend as you're working through those problems. So the first problem that I want to go over with comes from your textbook, and it is problem number 19. So in your textbook, we are actually on page 19, and we're going to be looking at problem number 19. Just go over a few more of these concepts, see those definitions in action in the homework problems. This should help you out whenever you're working on your homework problems online this weekend. So anyway, let's get started. So if you will look at problem number 19, you can read it along with me if you have your textbook handy. It says, study of quality of drinking water. Disasters published a study of the effects of a tropical cyclone on the quality of drinking water on a remote Pacific island. Water samples were collected approximately 4 weeks after Cyclone Ami hit the island. The following variables were recorded for each water sample. Okay, variable A, town where the sample was collected. Now if you're talking about towns, those are going to fall into category names. They are names, they are not numerical measurements. So that would be a qualitative data value. All right, part B, the type of water supply, river intake, stream, or borehole. Again, going back and breaking up our answers all into categories, so that also would be qualitative in nature. Part C, acidic level, pH scale, 1 to 14. They just gave us units of measurements. That was a great big key. And they also gave us a naturally occurring numerical scale, 1 to 14. So definitely quantitative for our acidic level. D, turbidity level. Okay, again, they give us turbidity units in TUs. Whenever you're dealing with units, you're talking about units of measurement. So those are going to be numeric measurements. So those are quantitative in nature. E, temperature in degrees centigrade. So degrees, units of measurement again. So again, we're dealing with a quantitative data value. Part F, the number of fecal coliforms per 100 milliliters. Again, number tells us we're talking about numeric measurements, so quantitative it is. G, free chlorine residual, milligrams per liter. Again, those units of measurements are always big keys that tell us we are dealing with quantitative data. And finally, H, the presence of hydrogen sulfide, yes or no, categories. So that tells us we're dealing with qualitative data in this example. So just one more quick little recap of making sure that we can distinguish between the qualitative and the quantitative data values. All right, next we are going to move on to problem number 27. Let's find this in our textbook. 27, here it is. The bottom of the page on page 20. 27 says, the effect of the emotion of guilt on how a decision maker focuses on a problem was investigated in the Journal of Behavioral Decision Making. A total of 155 volunteer students participated in the experiment, where each was randomly assigned to one of 3 emotional states, guilt, anger, or neutral, through a reading-writing task. Immediately after the task, the students were presented with a decision problem, whether or not to spend money on repairing a very old car. The researchers found that a higher proportion of students in the guilty state group chose not to repair the car than those in the neutral state and anger state groups. Okay, first thing we want to do is identify our population. Remember, your population is all the set of all units where you gather your information from. In this particular case, we were gathering our information from students. So as we can see over here on this second screen, our population would be the set of all students. Our sample is the specific number of units that were involved in your study. So in our case, there were 155 students that volunteered to take part in our experiment. So that would constitute our sample. Our variable, that's the information that we collected from those students. That would be whether or not to spend money on repairing a very old car. Part B, identify the data collection method used. So it was not an observational study because our researcher had control. They put the participants into 3 groups. This is a designed experiment. Part C says what inference was made by the researcher. This is the conclusion that's been drawn at the end of the study. And our conclusion is that it was inferred that a higher proportion of students in the guilty state group chose not to repair the car than those in the neutral state and anger state groups. All right, finally, Part D, to go to the beginning of the next page, says, in later chapters you will learn that the reliability of an inference is related to the size of the sample used. In addition to sample size, what factors might affect the reliability of the inference drawn in this study? Remember, one of the things that was stressed greatly in our lecture was the fact that in order for a statistical study to have valid results, you must have a representative sample. It is going to be highly unlikely that for this sample to be representative. Why? Because volunteers were used. Typically volunteers are going to be people that have really strong emotions or strong feelings, or maybe people that have to. Maybe I give the example here in the written portion that maybe a psychology class require students to participate in a certain number of studies over the course of the semester. So because you're forced to participate, then maybe you're not going to take it as seriously as you should, and you might not answer all the questions accurately. Or another example is maybe that you're being paid. Sometimes they'll have experiments or studies in which they pay the volunteers, and so you have a vested interest. So those people that didn't volunteer, that didn't get paid, might have a different viewpoint than those that did. So all of those are going to contribute to the fact that the sample's not going to give you a representative sample, which means that your results are not going to be valid for all students. They would only be valid for those 155 that took part in the experiment. Okay, and I would like to go over one more homework problem. Moving on, let's look next at problem number 33. I just want to make sure that all of you have all the necessary tools that you need to be successful when you're working through your homework for this particular chapter. All right, I was on the wrong, hang on there. Try that again. Okay, here for problem number 33. It says, the popular primetime ABC television program 2020 presented several misleading and possibly unethical surveys in a segment titled Facts or Fiction, Exposés of So-Called Surveys. The information reported from 4 of these surveys conducted by businesses or special interest groups with specific objectives in mind are given. Okay, actual survey facts are provided in parentheses. Survey 1, the Quaker Oats study. Eating oat bran is a cheap and easy way to reduce your cholesterol count. So that is what the Quaker Oats company was saying based on their study. But here's the fact, here's what they didn't say, that the diet must consist of nothing but oat bran to achieve a slightly lower cholesterol count. Very, very misleading. Okay, next study, March of Dimes report. Domestic violence causes more birth defects than all medical issues combined. In fact, there wasn't even a study. This was a false report by the March of Dimes. Very unethical. All right, study 3, American Association of University Women. Only 29% of high school girls are happy with themselves compared with 66% of elementary school girls. That's a little bit misleading because here's the fact. Of 3,000 high school girls, 29% responded always true to the statement, I am happy the way I am. Most answered sort of true and sometimes true, meaning they still had a positive self-image, just maybe not always true that they're happy that the way they are. I'm sure all of us have a little something we would like to change, but doesn't mean we don't think positively of ourselves. All right, finally, the Food Research and Action Center study. 1 in 4 American children under age 12 is hungry or is at risk of hunger. But here's what the survey results were based on. Responses to the questions. Do you ever cut the size of meals? Do you ever eat less than you feel you should? And did you ever rely on limited numbers of foods to feed your children because you're running out of money to buy food for a meal? Okay, let's look at these individually. Part A, refer to the Quaker Oats study relating oat bran to cholesterol levels. Discuss why it's unethical to report the results as stated. They are implying in this report that if you just add any amount of oat bran to your diet that you are going to lower your cholesterol. They don't tell us that you have to eat nothing but oat bran, and the fact that the benefits are only slightly lower cholesterol. Extremely misleading. All right, Part B, consider the false March of Dimes report on domestic violence and birth defects. Discuss the type of data required to investigate. So if you wanted to actually know, was that true and not just made up? Is there statistical evidence to show that that inference is actually true? What data collection method would you recommend? Okay, so if we are going to do this, we're going to need an observational study, and being more specific, we are going to need a survey. And here's who we would need to survey. We would need to take a sample of women who gave birth to babies that had birth defects. So if we're going to compare what causes these birth defects, then we need a representative sample nonetheless of people that had birth defects to begin with. Then once we identify this sample of mothers who gave birth to babies with birth defects, then we could survey the women and ask them the question of whether or not domestic violence was involved during their pregnancy. So this is how we could give some statistical power to this inference. As is, it has no power. It is misleading and is completely unethical to give results when a study is not even performed. Okay, Part C. Refer to the AAUW study of the self-esteem of high school girls. Explain why the results of the study are likely to be misleading. Again, they only considered the most positive response, that they are always happy with the way they are. They didn't consider the other cases of positive responses, that this is sometimes true or that it's sort of true. You can mostly feel happy about yourself and have a very positive self-image, but still would like to change a few things. So in order to the data that would be necessary to assess the self-esteem of high school girls, they would need to combine all of the positive responses to have a more representative view of what percentage of teens are actually happy with themselves and have an overall positive self-image. Finally, Part D, refer to the FDA Center Study of Hunger in America. Explain why the results of the study are likely to be misleading. Okay, this study would be misleading because the children were really never asked if they were hungry. The questions were somewhat ambiguous, okay, that just because you cut the size of a meal or you eat less than you should doesn't necessarily mean that you are hungry. Sometimes I cut the size of a meal or I eat less than I feel like I should because I just didn't feel all that hungry when it was mealtime. So there was a meal and I went ahead and ate, but I didn't eat as much as I probably would at another time if I was hungry. Or sometimes I cut the size of meals because maybe I need to lose a little bit of weight. And so it doesn't necessarily imply that I'm hungry. It just means that I'm trying to make a change. So all of these would contribute to the inaccuracy of the results that were given. So what needs to happen in order to try to make those questions less ambiguous or leading, the researchers need to ask the children if they're hungry. For instance, are they consistently going to bed hungry, or are they consistently hungry even after meals, which would show that they're not getting enough to eat. They're still hungry and the food sources that they are being provided are not meeting their needs. So rephrasing the questions in that manner would add to the validity of the study results. So again, I just want to give you a little extra help today since I didn't finish all of the questions that I wanted to in the lecture, in the media site lecture. So you will see these particular problems reiterated and talked about again on Monday's lecture in media site, so you'll just have a jump up on them. But again, I just wanted to make sure that you had all the resources that you needed to be successful in your online homework this weekend. So have a great weekend and I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.